So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay, and today we will be looking at the wilderness of TALATH, DIRNEN. At least, well, I say wilderness. There are a few elven structures dotted around this map, but it is one of those interesting field battles which I believe we have seen before, albeit that was in more of a free-for-all sense, where control of this hill in the middle. It was also a scored resolution free-for-all as well, so that is very much worth bearing in mind. The dynamic of this battle will be quite different to that one, and we shall be seeing in particular a lot of these terrain features that run across the middle of the map come into play much more, I would imagine. But yes, as was indicated in both my channel update, which has just passed, and also in the live stream that I did with J-Monster a little while back, I do intend to sprinkle a few more Silmarillion battle replays in now, and that will be easier now that I can source replays directly from the Silmarillion Discord and the Battle Replay channel there. Previously I was only doing replays I was directly sent because there was some real guarantee that people wanted me to show off something, as it was in the final stages of active development of the current public build. But now there will be a little bit more in terms of replays I can do there, which is good. It allows for a little bit of variety to be sprinkled in. This is also a 4v4 free-for-all pitch battle, I should say, in comparison to the last battle replay we saw from Silmarillion, which was a 3v3 of course. Once again, however, it is going to be from J-Monster's perspective that we view this battle. That wasn't by intention or anything, it just happened to be the second replay that I picked up from the Discord, which seemed to be suitable, shall we say. And he's going to be playing as the House of Fingolfin, which certainly from a mechanical perspective are one of the factions which I think I would get along best with. They've definitely got a good balance to them, and they've got a lot of really nice upfront and personal tools, lots of damage that they can do, but they have a balance to them, which some of the other elven factions, they tend to go in a little bit heavier into one particular aspect. Fingolfin, they've got their swordsman, which we'll get onto in a moment, and they definitely have a focus there, as well as their human axeman, which is a nice little balance. They also have a phalanx unit. They seem like a really well-rounded faction to me. Herdsmen of Hithlum are one such unit. They're very multifaceted. They are, in terms of an archer, they're relatively basic, and they don't actually have a ton of ammunition either. So really the bows are just to do a little bit of damage in the initial phases. What really sets them apart is the fact that they are decent shock infantry in melee as well. Gives you a bit of armor piercing, which without the human contingent to Fingolfin, they would lack a bit of armor piercing, especially in melee. So that is very much worth bearing in mind if you do intend to play as Fingolfin. A lot of their armor piercing will come from your Hithlum units, the Edain auxiliaries. However, the heart and soul of your army, of course, is going to be your elven infantry. The Armatar of Barad Eithel are a morale buffing, slightly stronger version of their mainline Barad Eithel infantry units. They are half strength, but they're a nice little supporting tool, which he has got in the middle of his army there. He's actually got 2 units of them, so they're pretty expensive and they're relatively small in number, but they are of course high quality. Usually they're used as a supporting tool and not the be-all and end-all on the front line, but it does look as though he's going for a bit more of a skirmish-heavy build here, with 3 units of the Herdsmen of Hithlum, which could of course double as infantry in melee, and going for a few javelins as well, the Marines of Vinyamar. Now, much to my embarrassment, I don't know whether these are hard target or soft target javelins. I believe they're soft target javelins though. That's what's coming to mind, because I believe this is something which has come up before, which means they won't have quite the same punch as they used to, but they do have more ammunition, they have got a lot of range, and it just gives Fingolfin in this situation a bit more of an opportunity to try and use some ranged tools, and drawing the enemy towards them going to be a couple of catapults. So, I mean, they're not short on ranged firepower here, Fingolfin, and this is quite a different way to play them, I think, because you are foregoing quite a lot of money that you can pour into your infantry line. Herdsmen of Dorloman, basic human spearmen, which are going to be joined by the cream of the elven crop from a Fingolfin perspective, the Irimo Arantar, which are a really strong unit of bodyguard, sword and shield infantry. And then at the back we have the main infantry line that J-Monster has brought today. The Sentries of Hithlum, which are of course the Edain pikes, lightly armoured, basic as far as pikes go, but pikes are not a very common tool in Silmarillion, so the fact that they have them at all is very useful for a front line like this, and they are going to be joined by the Bladesmen of Barad Eithel. This is the basic version of the line infantry that we saw in front in the Armatar. So an interesting build there. He's definitely going to be reliant on his range tools, drawing the enemy to him, and then using his up close and personal punch to good effect. Then we've got Waffles, who's playing as the Easterlings. So the Easterlings, of course, they do have good in them, especially here in the Silmarillion. One half of them is inspired by sort of good aligned men, and the other by evil aligned men. Fangs of the Faithless are here, a much needed addition to the Eastlings, I think. A foot archer that fires poison projectiles. They're okay in melee. Much of their effectiveness in melee comes to the fact that they're decently survivable, more so than outright damaging. And then in behind them we also have horse archers. The Eastlings are capable of fielding more horse archers in number than anyone else in the game, which is much needed considering they only have the one archer that they can field on foot just in front of them there. A couple of units of the Salamandrine Guard are the more expensive variant, to be fair, but in this sort of situation they can be really useful. Gives you the mobility that you need around the battlefield in a 4v4, as well as being really good in melee against other cavalry. We'll try and pick up the pace from here, of course, so I don't want to ramble too long. Clan Guard of Lothlan and Halberdiers of Lothlan, a solid front line, which is usually brought as the Eastlings. Again, it offers you that phalanx with the Halberdiers, which makes your front line far more solid. He's also got the Amberone Honour Guard, which is the sword and shield bodyguard for the Easterlings. Massive shield value on them as well, which is very nice. And through the tree line here, a couple of units of the Wardens of Lothlan, which are the spear variant of their heavier unit, and they are going to be rolling with some Marauders of Heimerring, which are an axe thrower, and then sort of a light line infantry unit, which aren't going to pull up any trees in melee on their own, no doubt, but when they're out of ammunition, they can at least form up a new infantry line for you to use. So interesting, certainly going for a heavier feeling, the army from Waffles here. Then we have Doriath, played by Alexander 10Q, who's got a lot of his units hidden. Tyrann Lies Danon are hidden in the trees, I would imagine as well. It's the same unit, in fact. Out in front here, though, Warriors of Region and Shield Bearers of Region. So Doriath have got a bit more of an aggressive edge to their heavier elven units. They don't have quite the same armour or survivability as some of their other elven cousins do, but they have much easier access to the kind of damage that you want to be doing with this sort of infantry. The Warriors of Region in particular being those two-handed axes that offer the AP. Cuthalim offer that same AP but at range with their bows, and they're also very, very strong heavy swordsmen in melee. Back here, got some Wardens of the Girdle, which you can see there they've got dual axes in melee. Again, a lighter archer. They have poison projectiles as well, though, which could be useful if they want to try and rout the enemy. And a catapult, which is already firing here. Lord of Belagost actually playing as another Doriath army. He's going to be trying to draw the enemy towards him as well, so the blue team going to try and make the red team come to them, which is a tried and tested stratagem. We have some Rangers of the Girdle over here once more. We have got some Axe Guard of Region, some Spear Host of the Girdle, which actually have poison javelins, which is a very unique thing. And again, they're the lighter Girdle units, which Doriath have available to them, the Region units being the slightly heavier ones. Warriors of Region, the Donath and Mablung, which is a really strong bodyguard unit which is capable of dishing out an incredible amount of AP damage in melee. More Tyrann Lies Danon, which are armour-piercing axe throwers. Some Cuthalim, so lots of quality here, and also a lot of cavalry. Mounted Company of Region, but I definitely don't disagree with that, because if you're on the flank, a bit of cavalry certainly won't go amiss to try and help you out in that respect. Then, over on the red team, we have Dino Man playing as Angband. Angband, a very, very scary force when they get rolling. The Thralls of Angband are very useful for soaking up that ammunition from the enemy. You're not going to win any long-range skirmish fights as Angband, but you can definitely blunt your opponent's effectiveness using a unit like the Thralls, and they are very, very cheap, of course. Then we have some Ironshod Legionaries, unupgraded as they are, Ironshod Halberdiers as well. This is kind of like a more numerous, cheaper, but ultimately less elite version of what the Easterlings can do with their Lothlan units, Halberdiers and line infantry. The Reavers of Anfauglith are another unit of line infantry, but less focused on defence, more focused on attacking compared to the Ironshod Legion, because of course they wield an axe, their armour is slightly lower, but their damage is also notably higher. Ironshod Arbalists are a reason why you can't really afford to just sort of sit in Angband's sights, otherwise those crossbows are going to do really nasty damage to you over a longer period of time. A couple of units of them. More halberds, and then in the backfield I would imagine we start to get into some of their more heavy duty units. The Iron Crown, which of course are just a better version of the Iron Shods, really when push comes to shove, certainly significantly heavier. More Legion, we have the Balrogs, or to give them their proper name here, the Valoralkar. The devil can be in the details with how you use the Valoralkar. If you keep them moving, they can be really difficult to stop. The same is true of the Uraloki if we should see them. But if you do allow them to stop, there are a few units of anti-elephant class killing machines that you want to be very, very careful of. Ironshod Ravagers, armour piercing. going axe to axe with Doriath is not going to end well on an individual level for Angband, but as a collective, that's how Angband do their business. Spearguard. Tormentors of the Iron Crown are a heavy unit of armor-piercing line infantry, so that's very, very nice. Big shield, big armor, all of that business as well. Scourges of Gothmog, another lighter unit of infantry in terms of their defensive values, but that's of course because they're very deadly, I should say, excuse me, when it comes to their melee abilities. And Bulldogs, which are of course an extremely scary unit of line infantry as well. Moving on to his nearest ally, we have the House of Finarfin. House of Finarfin, a very nice faction if you like to have a very, very solid front line indeed. Warns of Nargothrond are armor-piercing spears, Captain Gervais playing as them. We've also got some Marksmen of Nargothrond, which this is the split shot projectiles. Split shot projectiles are very, very nice, especially against a big army. Doriath won't want to stay in their range for too long, but it is also worth bearing in mind that they do have the access to Balagost's catapult. The Bridge Wards of Nargothrond are the best unit of pikes in the game and will likely remain as such, which is a huge deal for Finarfin to have a unit like that. It allows them to have a really, really effective front line. Some Swordsmen of Talath DIRNEN, which are of course javelins, but a half-strength unit of them. And then I think we're moving on to the next army, in fact. No, that's the Defenders of Talath DIRNEN once again. More Swordsmen of Talath DIRNEN. The Company of Prince Gwindor, which are a unit of line infantry which have a ridiculously long charge. And by that I mean they start charging far in advance of other units. Warns of Nargothrond, Archers of Talath DIRNEN, and then we get on to Stewie playing as the House of Haladin. A difficult force to face out in the open because so many of their units can hide. Very ambushy in nature, akin to the Green Elves, albeit they accomplish their goals in a very different way. The Ulfedin of Eifel-Brandir are a multiple HP Berserker class unit. Should be very familiar with the kind of thing that they're doing. They do, however, have the Relentless trait, and they have a lot of mass, so they can push into the enemy lines. The Huskarlar of Thargellion. You can see that they are a throwing projectile unit from the way that they hold their axes. Of course, much of their army is hidden, as you would probably expect. The Dowerwarder of Eifel-Brandir as well. This is the closest thing, really, that they have to a bodyguard unit. But even this is not multiple HP, at least it wasn't the last time I checked. So that is worth bearing in mind. You're going to have to be quite careful with how you go about your business. We have some dismounted Mardrau of Malduin, which I believe this is the armor-piercing javelin, or one of the armor-piercing projectile options that the House of Halath have available to them. And then we have Agalar of Gudmudathon, who has got some Swordsmen of Talath DIRNEN. Got some Marksmen of Nargothrond, Swordsman. He's taken up a very nice position. May work against J-Monster this actually, because J-Monster will have to move forward at least a little bit just to be able to bombard this position. Swordsman, Defenders, Warns of Nargothrond, again the Bridge Wards, which the human pikes will be outclassed there, so it's kind of an unfortunate matchup in many ways this for Fingolfin, because Finarfin are one of the few factions which can just outright outlast them on the front line with all of their tools, Arqueni and Mordens of Nargothrond. So, without further ado, let's begin, and we will make our way over to this side of the battlefield first, purely because it is going to be over here where the first engagements take place, I believe. The Easterlings and the House of Halath are separated by a hill. J-Monster is pretty far away from Agalar's Finarfin army, and we are going to start seeing the bombardment begin almost immediately. But, not just that, you can see there a grazing blow on the Arqueni, only one of them die, which is fortunate. The Marksmen of Nargothrond are also going to start opening up, and this is bad news. Bad news for Doriath. You can see here that Doriath are going to try and sit here and take it, and to be fair to them, the Shield Bearers of Region are the best unit Doriath have for trying to absorb this kind of punishment because of those big shields that they have. But even then, it's not ideal. Doriath don't really want to sit in full view of firepower like that. Meanwhile, up here as well, Waffles going up with his Warns of Lothland, supported by those Marauders of Himring. I'm not sure whether this is going to be enough, numbers-wise, for the Easterlings to keep this under control. The Ulfedin are on the way, as well as the Huskarlar, supporting this primarily House Finarfin push. If these Ulfedin get into those Marauders of Himring, they will absolutely devastate them. But having said that, the longer they remain exposed to those throwing axes, the more damage these very lightly armoured Ulfedin are going to take. The Ulfedin do get into them, and that is a problem for the Marauders, which means more and more Easterlings are going to be required to make moves over here. Company of Prince Gwyndor fighting on the front line alongside some Warns of Nargothrond. The Warns of Nargothrond are really important in this engagement because they will be helping to crack through the armour of these Lothland units, and the spears of the Easterlings in response are not going to do the kind of damage quickly enough that Finarfin kind of need them to. And Gervais is sending more and more up here. They're going to need some support here. I think the blue team are going to need to start making moves. Otherwise, the red team are going to continue to do their thing. A bit more damage being sustained by the bridge walls of Nargothrond, but they won't be too concerned about that. You can see there the Thralls of Angband have moved into place just to try and absorb some damage from Belagost's skirmishers. And also just test the waters a little bit, perhaps with some sort of advance. Archers of TALATH now turning around, as well as some marksmen. Axemen of the Girdle moving in. I think it's actually about time we turned down to half speed, to be honest with you, because things are getting pretty crazy, even though the engagement is kind of narrow. The throwing axes from Doriath doing their thing now, and going after some marksmen of Nargothrond, going to try and do some damage to these very deadly, heavy Finarfin archers. Swordsmen of TALATH are actually right there. It's a rather bemusing engagement, this, because they're so close to one another. But a lot of Alexander's army is now coming up here. You can see how quickly, though, these Girdle units are falling to the point-blank projectiles from Finarfin. They're going to need to get some infantry up here pretty quickly. The Warriors of Rhegium would be ideal, but in so doing, Captain Gervais is going to move forward, and that will, in turn, force Balagost to do something. I like the way the red team have set out in the early game here, a little bit more, to be honest, than the blue team have. Fangs of the Faithless, which, for some reason, that was the throwing projectile sound effect, but they're just going to be firing with a few poison projectiles. J-Monster, I think, senses the fact that he can't really move in. He can't do what he wanted to initially with his... Apologies for that interruption. As I was saying, J-Monster can't do initially what he wanted to do, clearly, with his army to try and draw Finarfin in. But he can move to the aid of his ally, the Easterlings, and he can do so with some pretty good effectiveness, I think, if he is willing to take that risk. Meanwhile, I think, whatever happened to the Ulfadin of Ethelbrandir? Did they pull back? I assume they did. There's not enough dead bodies on the floor for them all to be dead. Vanguard of Lothland pushing up onto the hill, going after the Huskarlar of Thargelion. Axes to swords. Halberdiers are making their way up here, which is probably a source of concern, to be honest with you. The Waldschreiter Dragoons, another horse archer unit here from the House of Halath. They'll be doing their thing. They've drawn their axes. It is pretty chaotic, this fight. It's almost got a King of the Hills type vibe to it. But like I said, I just prefer slightly the way the red team have approached this battle so far. They're drawing the Easterlings in more and more, and they have also managed to claim the high ground, the all-important high ground. And those dismounted Dragoons are now going to be throwing their, or firing I should say, their own projectiles, their own arrows. Halberdiers moving in. And I am very keen to see... Oof, crunchy frame rate. The Warns of Nargothrond are fighting, and I think this is a bit of a mistake from Alexander 10Q, because he's playing into Finarfin's hands by being so aggressive to try and maybe stop the Finarfin advance, but he's not going to gain a great deal by doing this. Maybe he'll gain a little bit of time for Balagost to transition some of his units across, but Balagost actually needs to move his army in order for that to be the case. Here you can see the Valor Alcar moving in. I'm not entirely sure why the frames are completely abandoning me here. It's a bit annoying, to be honest, but no matter. The Valor Alcar doing their thing. They're quite lucky, honestly, that this isn't one of those really high charge bonus units of cavalry. Valor Alcar will do a lot of damage to those cavalry units in pure melee. Tyr-En Lysdannen are going to move forward, presumably to try and take a bite out of those Valor Alcar. The Girdle units, the Axemen of the Girdle, still pushing forwards. And you can actually see here the defenders of TALATH having to break off a little bit. Donath and Mablung getting onto the front line, so more and more reinforcements being sent up this hill. And actually, the Doriath reinforcements are making a big difference here to the outcome of this battle. The Easterlings have taken a bit of a beating, but things could fall apart yet up here for the Finarfin Halath assault. The Ulfadin are coming back. Those Berserkers will be very, very effective against all of these Lothland units on the front line, and they will need to be, because the dedicated Easterling heavier infantry is doing very, very nicely here against the more lightweight forces from the Haladin. And decisions are going to have to be made here, I feel. These Girdle units are going to start to struggle, however, against the heavier Finarfin units at the top of the hill. Defenders of Talath Dirnen are here. Didn't see them get to use their projectiles. Warriors of Region will be really, really effective here. High base damage, armor piercing, and they're going to be cleaving through what remains of these Talath Dirnen units. The Donath will also do the same. Marauders of Himring pulling out their one-handed Falxes. Halberdiers of Lothlin will give the Easterlings the anchor that they so desperately need. And the blue team doing rather better now. However, the red team can still make moves. It's down here that the frame rate is going completely to hell, and I'm not sure why. Tyrion lies down, getting ready, the catapult crew being sent forward, so Belagos clearly utilising all of his ammunition, and they are completely surrounded and outmatched by the Wardens of Nargothrond, but the presence of this cavalry does make it a little bit more difficult, perhaps, for them to continue to move forward. The Tyrion lies down, and I think the initial plan was to go after the Balrogs, but seeing as the Balrogs pulled back, they now have a good opportunity to shoot right into the side of this packed Finarfin front line, and the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, a very important tool for Captain Gervais moving forward in this battle, is going to be the main target. Wards of the Girdle still using their poison projectiles. Routing can be something you really do need to look out for in Silmarillion, but generally speaking it's a domino effect. Losing your general, the fight not quite going your way, that's when something like poison projectiles or fire arrows can really start to have more of an impact. Tyrion lies down and now the target of the Valar Alkar's affections as they raise their axes aloft. And now they're going to have to try and fight in melee, which is not really what the Tyrion lies down and want to do. They are a medium unit at best. Now though, J-Monster is going to be opening up with his 2 units of artillery. That is a big commitment of resources though, and if they don't pay for themselves, that will be the sort of thing which may come back to haunt them in the late game. But you can see here the Haladin revealing more of their troops, which is what is prompting this bombardment, I would imagine, as they now go within the trees. Terrain bonuses are very much a factor that you want to be taking advantage of, especially if you want to try and close the gap a little bit in terms of quality, as the Haladin will often have to do. There goes the Easterling General though, at the hands of the Ulfadin, and still this fight in the middle is where the main event is taking place. Warder of Brethil, or Warder of Brethil? Yes. Which are more basic spears from the Haladin, and they're being introduced to the Donath very quickly, but the Donath in return are getting lit up here by the split shots, and rather correctly Alexander is going to have to try and pull those great maces back away from being so exposed. Orders of Himring still waiting. The Easterlings have committed a lot of units forward. Fire arrows, is that? The Salamandrine Guard over here to try and help the blue team's efforts. And Lord of Balagos sending over more reinforcements as well. And Captain Gervais is a little bit isolated here, and I feel as though a lot of this comes down to the fact that Angband have only sent their Balrogs over here when really more support was required for this Finarfin line. In come the Warriors of Region now, a really nice rear charge, complete envelopment of the front line. And this is bad news for Gervais and his Finarfin army. Salamandrine Guard are going to try and rout these units off. Defenders of Talath Dirnen are leaving the area. What is actually happening over here now? I mean, Angband have moved forward. Doriath. Belagos doesn't really need to win this fight outright, and indeed he probably won't. If Angband see what's happening, then they will commit their numbers forward and overwhelm this smaller force from Doriath. But all he needs to do is distract Angband with some table scraps for a little while, and then the middle of the battlefield will be secured by the blue team. And even then, Doriath will go down swinging, especially against these more basic units of Iron Shod. Something like the Axguard of Regi are going to be ideally suited for facing down a unit like this, or units like this. Thralls of Angband are moving forward. The Halberdiers will make a big difference to Angband's chances on the front line though, but Belagos has still got supporting tools as well. Tyrion lies down and Spear Host. These Angband units have left it just a little bit too long really to be the help that Gervais and his Finarfin army needed. And if they're also losing here in the middle, then it spells disaster really for the red team. Bridge Wards are coming forward. Agalar is arriving on the front line now with a lot more of his units, but you get the feeling that this battle could already be heading in one direction only by the time he's actually committing his army, which is the downside to committing a little bit further back as he did. it can mean you're little more than a footnote in the course of the battle, which, to be fair, is also the case, perhaps, for J-Monster, but he is trying to force the issue a little bit more now. Scouts of Tor and Faroth revealing themselves, Rigsware of Brethel also doing the same. Peppering down these Bladesmen of Barad-Ithel, acting as minesweepers going through the territory where you know there's going to be a lot of hidden units, especially from the Haladin, but these Scouts of Tor and Faroth are Finarfin's answer to that as well. Another nice ambush-style unit. Warder of Brethel, Wardskreiter, Dragoons. So again, these basic spears are moving in. They're going to try and slow the advance of Fingolfin down. Fingolfin don't have as much infantry as they usually do at their disposal, but they should still have enough here to clear out a lot of this. Remembering, of course, that the Haladin have already fought quite hard for the middle. Rigsware of Brethel, a unit of light infantry combined with their capacity for javelins. Ones of Nargothrond are here. The Dawawada of Ethelbrandir, made of sterner stuff than quite a lot of the other Haladin units, but this is very much an ambush-heavy army, this. They don't have the Sword of Brothia on display, which would have made quite an effective front line. But you make sacrifices in this way. Marines of Vinyamar moving forward. The Frysware of Brethel, the entry-level archers that the Haladin have at their disposal. Dragoons also moving forward. I think there's just too many angles to cover at this point, and now they're able to shoot over the hill. Agalar's Finarfin army has moved forward to at least contest the hill still. The Ulfadin continue to do their thing, but there is not as many of them left as there used to be. The Mardrout are also fighting hard, but the Easterling Honour Guard doing the business. And Finarfin having to try and hold on to the side as well. Alexander may be overextending just a little bit, getting a little bit too greedy. Would have been perhaps a wiser move to cut your losses after defeating one of the Finarfin forces rather than try and overextend yourself like this. This is exactly the sort of thing which can give your opponents a way back into the fight. Meanwhile, from there you can see over there, Marksmen of Region using their Silverthorn arrows, going to make it a little bit more difficult for Angband to try and advance through here. Doriath are one of the better Elven factions, I think, at taking Angband on because of the ubiquity of armour piercing they have and the quality of armour piercing they also have. And this is bad for the Reavers of Anfalgleith, one of the more vulnerable units to arrows that Angband have. Tyrion lies down and continuing to move forward. The Bulldogs can be committed. You can tell here that Dinoman is newer than the other players in the lobby, I would say, purely because his army is a little bit more shattered and broken all over the field. Not in the sense that they're routing, but more in the sense of the cohesive whole. And that has been a bit of a difference maker here. Like I said, if Gervais had had more backup from Angband earlier on, that fight could have gone very differently. As it is, though, the scale of the danger I don't think was recognised soon enough. Ironshod Ravagers fighting, but they are being outclassed here once again by Doriath. He was patient here, was Belagost, and that has paid dividends in the Ironshod Halberdiers. Great Waffles making good use of his Salamandrine Guard, a scary sight to be sure, pulling out their shotels more so than their bows here in the later stages. Let's go back over here though and let's see Croatani Marauders being forced backwards by the Scouts of Tor and Faroth. Arqueni Morma Gilwar coming in here, and they will make quick work, you would say, of the Fyrdsmen of Dorlomen. Haskala are over here. Always a tricky foe to pin down of the Haladin, but when you do pin them down in a situation like this, you would fancy your chances, even though Fingolfin haven't invested in their infantry quite as much, which may yet prove to be a bit of a problem. The Dawawada getting into melee, axe in one hand, kite shield in the other. More bombardments happening now, trying to go after the Arqueni with that catapult. If they tag their own Fyrdsmen by doing so, they may yet break. A few riders of the Haladin are over here as well, but they are going to be not long for this world if they stick around in and amongst all of this heavy elven infantry. Some Armatar of Barad-Ithel fighting with the Wardens of Nargothrond. That's a bit of a clash of the Titans. More Armatar are over here, and they're fighting against the Swordsmen of Talath, DIRNEN, the Iremo Arantar continuing to do their thing. The tanks that they are. Meanwhile, here in the middle, It started off maybe looking a little bit hairy for the Easterlings up here, but slowly but surely they have managed to pull through, thanks in part due to the support from Doriath that they got, but also due to the anchoring that these halberdiers have offered them. And they weren't able to get their pikes, their bridge wards of Nargothrond up onto this hill to counteract them. Gervais, of course, had them isolated and destroyed by Doriath, and the other pikes are having to deal with the advance of Fingolfin. That has made things a little bit difficult for them. Cuthalion getting into melee, but at this point the numbers really aren't favouring the red team on the hill, and this is one of those engagements where both sides have committed so much to this fight that by losing it, you pretty much seal your own fate. More defenders of TALATH are arriving. Basic spears trying to do their thing. Scouts of Tauren Faroth are over here as well, so Gervais still has a few units actually. Doriath is still here. It is a scattered force now. Spearguard of the Iron Crown actually managing to isolate and destroy this one unit of Warriors of Region. So Belagost's army has started to run out of steam a little bit. Having to hack and slash a way through orcs in this number is a difficult task. He should still be victorious over here, but it isn't going to be a landslide by any means. So the blue team, if they are to be victorious, will need to do so under their own steam elsewhere on the map. They can't rely on Belagost bringing more to the party later. There goes another general. Interesting. More of the blue team generals have fallen as of right now. Evenly matched fights here. I think that's more due to the fact that the Easterlings are still busy. There goes the Fingolfin general as well. This could yet have a big impact. Like I said, the loss of a general can be a very significant morale shock, as I have learnt, much to my dismay. They're dropping like flies now. Considering only one general really died in the earlier stages of the battle, it's not too surprising to see this. This, I think, is a bit of an unsung hero in this battle so far. We've seen them flitting around, but the Salamandrine Guard have been used really, really well. They've been charging into exposed units, dealing with the stragglers, and as a result, it's been much more difficult for the red team to form up more cohesively. They're going to charge in here. The Scouts of Tauren Faroth are two-handed spears in melee, which won't be great for the health of the Salamanders, but just to stop them from firing. And over here, Croatani Marauders coming in. More of these Easterling axe throwers. There's a couple of Dragoons still alive. Here come some scouts. How is J-Monster's infantry getting on? Not all that well. And a combination of Finarfin and the Haladin have won. This is exactly what the red team needed, I think. A significant victory somewhere. And a large part of this, it has to be said, does come down to the fact that J-Monster... It was really his composition more so than his play that has led to his downfall here. The fact that he had a lot of ranged units, he was more of a supporting army, and he ultimately decided to take the front foot with that supporting army. And you live by the sword and you die by the sword. You see that Dawawada still leading the way. I'm not sure whether this is going to be enough to turn the tide of the battle entirely. I think with the Easterlings still occupying a strong position on this hill, lots of Lothlin units to act as a centre. They still have some Cuthalion. Well, I say that, their elite units are very, very depleted. There's not many red team units still trying to contest the hill. There's some Scouts of Tauren Faroth from Captain Gervais, as well as some Swordsmen of TALATH DIRNEN. Still doing reasonably well, actually. So it is it's close, numbers-wise, but I do still back the blue team here. Armitar of Baradithel leaving, managing to get out of the melee engagement with the advance. That's the thing with charging into a Haladin part of the map. J-Monster clearly wanted to root out the Haladin as they were hiding, but they had enough left in the tank there, combined with the more solid Finarfin warriors, to turn back the light on infantry force that J-Monster sent forward. I don't know whether it's going to be enough though. I mean, Wardens of Nargothrond in still fairly high numbers. That's a scary thing. Croatani Marauders are going to be doing damage as they move. That will hasten the red team to make a move more quickly. Swordsmen of TALATH getting in here. They're trying to position themselves just so for Rotani Marauders in the backfield. I think, having a look over here, yes indeed, Angband are leaving. And Belagos, while it's not a huge army by any means, these are still all going to be very valuable reinforcements, which I think is going to put the batch beyond the red team here. The Arqueni Mormagilwa, however, are still on the front line. I mean, 31 of them is nothing to sneeze at. They are an exceptionally strong unit. There's still Dawawada in here, which while they may not have the multiple HP of the Arqueni they fight alongside, wherever the Dawawada actually are, they are still a pretty venomous unit of infantry when they're in melee. But here come the Salamandrian Guard once again, being used very, very nicely. That mobility has been key. Don't recall seeing any cavalry outside of the Haladin for the red team, which is not too surprising. I mean, Finarfin don't have cavalry. Angband, the one unit of cavalry they have in the Wolf Riders, is an average unit of cavalry at best. That wouldn't have been enough to face a unit of salamanders that were used as well as this, I don't believe. Fangs of the Faithless in here, and we are coming towards the dying embers of this fight, and it is going to be a blue victory. Lots going on in this fight, lots to dissect. The main engagement, you would have to say, was centred around the hill, but there was the Fingolfin advance into the Haladin occupied territory. There was Gervais's advance to try and encircle the hill, but in so doing, Doriath were able to isolate and destroy him because Angband weren't quite able to get over and reinforce him quickly enough. And of course there was the fight over on the far side between Belagos and Angband. Dinoman's Angband. Speaking of which, here come Doriath. More girdle units. Wards of Nargothrond still doing their thing. Rotani Marauders in large numbers, being chased off by a single unit of Wardens of Nargothrond. No need for them to be quite so bashful. They could just try and mob the Wardens in melee at this point, but they're going to leave that to Doriath instead. Axes raised. It's a fairly healthy unit of Donath as well, that have managed to survive the attentions of Angband and Finarfin earlier in the fight. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. But yes, an interesting fight that's ups and downs for both sides, but I maintain what I said. Both sides committed so much to this hill fight that whoever was going to win this fight was going to win the battle overall. And ultimately that was the blue team. Nice support from Doriath. The Easterlings committed their halberds just so. The halberdiers from the Easterlings, definitely one of the workhorses of this victory, I think. The support coming in as well from Fingolfin's skirmishers. Overall, the blue team were just a little bit more cohesive in the whole, which is strange because early on, the very early game, I thought the red team had that a little bit more under control, but that very swiftly turned around. Battles are dynamic things after all. And when the blue team seized the momentum, the red team never fully managed to claim it back. Not across the whole battlefield anyway. Here come all the Rotani Marauders. And there we go. It is going to be just nearly 10%. But I would say that most of the units that are still on display for the blue team are these very low tier Rotani Marauders. And also the Girdle units, which by Doriath standards are basic. There's not a lot of heavy hitters still remaining. That unit of Donath from Doriath, probably the most impressive unit that's still on the field. But yes, Salamandrian Guard used very, very nicely, I would say. Proving their worth. Mobility is such a big part of what makes the Easterlings what they are. And the Salamandrian Guard are the jewel in that particular crown, from an Easterling perspective. And there we go. Victory for the blue team. And the massacre at TALATH ends in their victory. And fair play too. I think I've already said everything that needs to be said there. There goes the Haladin General, run through by a halberd. If I had to pick two units, honestly, which encapsulates this victory best, they'd both be Easterling ones. And it would be the Halberdiers of Lothlin and the Salamandrian Guard. Belagos getting the most kills, not too surprising given the fact that he was primarily responsible for the destruction of by far the biggest army on the field. There was a few Angband units that also fell into Alexander 10Q's path. Waffles also getting over there with his salamanders. Not too surprising. Don't want to be too harsh on Dino Man here because it is what it is. Because as a with a big army like that, you can't afford to be too static when your allies are in peril, because those numbers from Angband, especially if you back them up with the hard centre of the Iron Crown units, that could have made all the difference. It could have made Gervais's flank to try and encapsulate the hill and prevent Doriath from getting up onto the hill to reinforce the Easterlings. Could have made all the difference there, really could. But like I said, it is what it is. I was particularly impressed actually with the Haladin in this fight. They managed to turn back that Fingolfin advance through the middle, or through just to the side of the middle of the map, very nicely. And they were also good support for the Finarfin forces that were trying to contest that hill as well. Could have been different, but in the end I think deserved victors were the blue team. Let's see what did the damage for Fingolfin. Irimo Arantar doing nicely as the Marines of Vinyamar did, but the Blades on a Barad-Ithel, in the end, I think J-Monster's composition leads me to believe he wanted to approach this battle in a different way. In the end, if he had gone for a far more aggressive infantry-heavy army, it would have served him better, because then I really doubt if the below-strength Haladin and Finarfin force that he ran into, it wouldn't have been able to withstand a more full-blooded infantry force from Fingolfin. If you're talking about more Barad-Ithel units, perhaps something as scary as the Sons of Hurin as well, wouldn't have gone as well for them. So he's a victim of circumstance there, though, J-Monster. Like, Agalar was too far back for him to really try and force Finarfin to come forward into him. And his allies needed support, ultimately. So he needed to move. He couldn't have really approached the battle any differently. And when he decided to move forward, honestly, I can't see anything wrong with that per se. It's a risk, but your team is in the lead at that point, and you can force the issue a little bit. And even if you do fall, as J-Monster did, you're going to do damage, ultimately. The Haladin are not going to be able to escape unscathed with that many Barad-Ithel infantry units on display. So yeah, I'll say thank you to J-Monster, even though he didn't send it to me directly. He did post it up on the channel that I took it from, so big thank you to him. Big thanks to all of the players as well for being a part of this battle replay. Like I said, there will be more Silmarillion sprinkled into the regular viewing schedule from here. They do... Scenarios may very well follow. I do know that people are making scenarios, but that's one of those things that I won't take scenarios unless people actually send them to me, because it could be that they're still being developed. People don't want me to show them until they're finished, that sort of thing. But hopefully we do get to see some more of that sort of thing from Silmarillion, because I think there is a lot of potential there. As for what's coming next, I believe I have another large-scale siege on Reforged. I think. Should already have submitted Moria by now. So I think it might be a return to Merlond, which is interesting. Merlond is one of those interesting maps which we'll talk about when we get to it, but that may very well be the next replay that I show. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.